welcome friends. We welcome you to the next lecture in the series of bus transportation. We have looked at how bus transportation planning is done. Now, let us look at some of the financial aspects in bus transportation. Fares are one of the very important things when you are determining the viability of any public transportation system and also subsidy. So, in this we will be introducing you to how different types of financing schemes are used in order to determine fares and subsidy in a sustainable fashion. So, when we are talking about any public transportation system, it is always understood that it has to maintain a certain quality of service. In order to maintain a certain quality of service or certain performance, it has to have enough financial resources. Now, financial resources have always been tight in the case of public transportation, especially because of the reason that the fares that are charged for public transportation do not always cover for their capital costs or maintenance and operation of these public transportation systems. So, on the other hand, since they are public transportation facilities meant for the masses, the fares have to be kept reasonably under control. So, how do we balance these two factors in order to have a sustainable public transportation system in your city? That is how we are going to approach this lecture. So, fares contribute the single largest source of finance for any transit company, right. There are other ways of collecting revenues as well, that is through either advertising or through renting of spaces for different types of other uses, such as public buses are sometimes given for private special events. If you have a large sporting event in your city, you may see that the public buses are rented to get people from the stadium to different parts of the city. So, those are other ways of generating revenues. However, the most dependent are the operators are mostly dependent upon the fares that are collected every day from the operations of the public transport system. Now, fares should be determined in a system wide multimodal context. It should also relate to the overall economic and social strategies for the development of transport, and fare systems are the set of rules to determine the fare to be paid according to the facilities extended and the type of the trip. So, all of this, what it means is that if you have two different types of services available or public transport services available in your city, although both of them may be taking the person from point A to point B, which is the same distance, but if the services are different types, you will be able to charge different fares. For example, any two different types of buses may be operating on the same route. One may be an air conditioned bus and one may be a regular bus. Both of you will take you to your destination most likely the same amount of time, but the services that are offered by an air conditioning bus is higher than what the service or the quality of service by a regular bus, and hence the fare would be higher. So, that is what is meant by how fare should be determined, right. So, a fare structure can either be determined by the costs borne by the transport undertaking, the quality of the transportation desired, and also the component from other modes of competition from other modes of transport. So, let us look at each of them. So, if the transportation undertaking, so if the transportation agency that is providing you the services, if that is able to absorb a lot of costs, then the fares may be different, whereas if they may not be able to absorb all the costs, that means they have a very tight budget, then they may be dependent heavily on the fares in order to operate. Whereas, if you also have different frequencies, so if you expect that you have higher frequencies during peak times of travel, you may want to provide nighttime services So, all of this requires additional fares during these different times of service, right. They may be have different fares during different times of the day. And also if you say that there are multiple transport modes, some of the cities, some of the metropolitan cities have just different types of buses, some may be government buses, some may be private buses. So, if there is so much competition, and then if there is metro as well, so there is if there is too many agencies providing public transportation services, then competition also determines how much fare can be charged, right. Transit fare structure have a direct influence on the patronage and the productivity of the system. So, if the fares are high, in most cases public transportation systems will have low ridership, right. Suddenly, so people are not very keen to raise public transportation fares, right. It may, fearing that it may lead to lesser number of people taking the system, and then the revenues may further fall down. However, in order to maintain the frequency of service or the productivity, they have to charge certain amount of money, and they cannot charge anything below. So, that kind of a balancing has to be done. Always again, since these are for the masses of the city, and mostly a large majority of the masses are either middle class or around the poverty line in majority of our cities and towns. So, we have to always make sure that the fares are reasonable for them as well to take the public transportation system. Now, there are different types of fares, but they can be broadly classified into these three types. One is called a flat fare, one is a variable fare, and one is a special fare. So, flat fare meaning a fixed rate of a trip on a route irrespective of the trip length, justifiable for, but these are justifiable short trips, right. So, these are sometimes you see that a flat rate is charged for any kind of public transportation trips. This may be not very free, not very largely observable in our cities, but if you go to special areas such as say transport from airport parking to the airport terminal, the parking may be at 2 or 3 different distances, 2 or 3 different layers of distances from the terminal itself, but a flat fare is charged. Usually when you travel abroad in larger airport systems, you would see such kind of flat fares. Also, if you have a small monorail, for example, for shorter distance of travels in certain cities, they just charge you a flat fare. Light rail transports also sometimes in some cities have flat fare. So, it does not matter you are traveling for 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers or 10 kilometers. It may not be up to 10 kilometers because it is usually a very shorter trip. So, then a flat fare is charged. Mostly variable fares are dependent, mostly the fares are variable and they are dependent upon the trip length, and they can be again classified into 3 broad categories: distance fares, sectional fares, or zonal fares, right. So, what are these? So, these are examples of this is a chart that shows you flat fare. Let me get the pen up. So, this is kind of a flat fare, does not matter the distance you are traveling, you are always paying a constant rate, and this is a distance based rate, right. So, your fare for a certain distance remains flat, and then it kind of goes up at a certain rate. Now, what is called sectional fare? This you may notice in some of the bus systems also, but mostly in the metro systems. So, for a certain section your fare remains constant, right. So, anywhere you travel between these 2 points, your fare remains constant. Then there is another section. So, this is another section where your fare is kind of constant within that section, but then if you travel from this section to this section, then your fare goes up. So, this is called a sectional fare, and then you may have a zonal fare system as well. So, if you have a city such as Delhi, where everything radiates out of the center, then you may have one zone radial zone within which they are charged the same fare. Then if you go out of that zone, then you may be charged a different fare. There are also polycentric area fares that can be applied for your city's urban transportation system or bus transport system. Fare differentiations. So, in order to attract more passengers to the transit service, the transit undertaking may opt for a differential fare. So, now differential fare is either spatial differentiation or temporal differentiation or multiple journey season tickets involving discount of various fares, right. So, spatial differentiation meaning when you are looking at based on distance travelled within maybe a central business district or so on and so forth. So, if you are travelling to the central business district in the morning in the peak period, you may be charged a different fare versus if you are travelling in the opposite direction from the central business district to the suburbs, you may be travelled. So, different spaces in your route may be travelled, you can charge different fares, whereas during different times of the day you may be charged different fares, right. If it is a off peak period, you may be charged a different fare. If it is peak period, you may be charged a different fare. Similarly, you are or otherwise if you are say a season pass holder, right. So, you can have monthly passes or you can have special 3-day passes, especially when you go to a new city or a foreign city where you do not know the routes. What you usually do is you just buy a 2-day, 3-day pass, so that you can just use the transportation system as you wish. You do not have to pay every time you get on. So, these are all differential fare systems that a transit authority develops in order to attract people towards the use of their public transport systems. Now, what are the factors that affect fares, right? It involves a compromise between the demands of the users and the operators, and often these demands are conflicting in nature, right. Like I said earlier, people always want the rates to be lower, the fares to be lower, whereas the operators have to maintain a certain fare in order for them to operate, do the regular maintenance and also to grow, right, because the population in the city is ever growing. So, the public transportation system also has to grow. So, in order for them to grow and buy new buses or add new trains or whatever, add new metro rail or whatever it is, they have to always have some surplus earning which they can then invest in purchasing newer vehicles or newer buses, newer metro rail. So, they always have to charge a fare, whereas the public always wants to keep the fare low. So, how do we come to a compromise? That is transit fare structure always has to reach that optimal level. It is often what is often calculated is called a transit fare elasticity. It is measured by the percentage change in transit demand per percentage change in fare level. So, you kind of measure how sensitive your fares are, right. If you increase the fare by 5%, would the ridership change by 5%? Would it go up? Would it go down? Or would it change by 4% or only 2.5%, or would it change by 6%, 7%? So, how elastic is your fare? Like, is your fare fairly elastic or is it plastic? So, that is what somehow people determine, or operators and researchers often try to determine how much fare elasticity occurs in your city, right. This will be different for different cities, because if it all depends upon the socioeconomics of your city, right. If your city have a lot of people middle income or upper middle income, then the fare elasticity will be relatively less, whereas if you have a city that is lower middle income group or income groups under the poverty line or at the poverty line, then your fare elasticity is pretty high. I mean, it is a little bit change will bring a little bit change in the fare level will bring about a lot of change in the ridership numbers. So, this fare elasticity is very much a measure that is calculated by the operators. Now, here comes in the subsidy, which can be applied appropriately to the fare structure, and a compromise between the cost of operation and affordability can be reached. Now, in this balancing act, saying that the operators have to charge x amount of cost, x amount of money per person or as a fare, whereas the user wants it x minus a amount. So, they always want less. So, how will that a? So, if the users want a cost of a and the operators want the fares to be at b, where b is greater than a. So, this difference b minus a sometimes is subsidized. So, or subsidized meaning somebody is paying for it, it is not the users that are paying for it, somebody else is paying for this extra money that is required, because the operators just cannot operate below a fare of b, and that is called the subsidy. It is usually the government that provides this subsidy. So, factors affecting fares in India, the transit demand is almost fare inelastic for small changes in transit fare. We have reached a point where public transportation systems are at a very low price. So, a little bit increase does not change much. So, that is a good state where we are. However, fare elasticities varies with income level, like I said earlier, trip purpose and also the level of service offered, right. Trip purpose meaning it is fairly inelastic when you are going to work. So, when you are going to work, when you are going to work every day, you know that this work is a very important place, you have to reach there, you have to use public transportation. So, even if the fare is a little bit higher, I am willing to pay it. However, if it is a weekend trip where you are going for leisure and that trip purpose is going to a movie theater or something, you may think twice that should I, if the price is higher, would I be willing to pay for it or not. So, that is what is called trip purpose. Of course, in income level we have already discussed, and the level of service that is offered by the buses or the metro, right. So, if you are assured a seat on a bus, for example, so if you buy a bus ticket and you are said that you are assured a seat, then you may be willing to, it is seen by research that you will be willing to pay higher for that kind of a ticket, whereas if you are not assured a seat and you are said that if your seat is available you can sit, otherwise you have to travel standing, then you may be not willing to pay a higher. So, that is called the level of service that is offered. Again, air conditioning buses also, you are offering a higher level of service. Some buses in some developed countries have Wi-Fi systems that allow you to work on the metro or the bus. So, that offers a higher level of service. So, you are willing to pay higher in those cases. In Indian cities, the demand for public transport in terms of total person trips is increasing, right. In terms of total person trips, just because the population is increasing, that is also increasing. However, the total trips in percentage terms has decreased over the years, the share of public transportation. So, the number of people using public transportation versus the number of people using their own modes of transport, their own private modes of transport, two wheelers or four wheelers, in that percentage is going down. So, fewer and fewer people or percentage of people are using public transportation, and current share of is below the desired level. So, this is a cause of concern in most of the cities in India, because if public transportation share goes down, that means there are more number of private cars and private two wheelers on the road, and that is usually an indicator of higher levels of congestion on your urban streets. So, what can be done? How can the fares be structured in order to gain these riders back to the public transportation system is always the main focus for operators in India, in not only Indian cities, but also majority of the cities across the world. Ideally, the aim would be for any city is to have a 75-25 split between public and private transport, right. we would want that 75% of the trips that are taken in a city are taken by public transportation means, and a quarter of them can be taken using your private modes. So, in order to achieve this kind of a split, many cities are also experimenting with free public transportation, right. So, when people are offered free public transportation, the justification often is the economic benefits of it almost are much higher than the actual financial losses that may be incurred because there are no fares. So, the benefit cost analysis is done in terms of economic benefits rather than merely on financial or revenue benefits, because then you would have lesser emissions, improved health. So, emissions has a cost associated with it, health has a cost associated with it, and all those costs add up to say that free public transportation is much more beneficial to a city rather than having them charge for that money. Now, this is just being experimented in many cities. You may have heard of New Delhi also offering free public transportation to its women users. So, those are all schemes behind which a lot of calculation goes on in order to estimate how sustainable such pricing policies are. This is a very basic term, basic figure that shows how subsidies work. Fare revenues are, like we said, are usually insufficient to meet operational and maintenance cost, and financial sustainability of service requires additional source of income such as subsidies from the government. So, I mean, if you look at a supply demand curve, so this is the demand of public transportation services, and if this is the supply curve prior to subsidy, so prior to subsidy the person is paying anybody is paying a fare of this much of P1 for a output or a quantity. So, there may be n number of buses that is running at that may be running in your system for a fare of this much, whereas if a subsidy is introduced, or if government says that okay, we will introduce a subsidy, then there will be a new supply curve that will be developed in the system, and then that supply curve, the subsidy would be the difference between the fare that is now paid by the consumer versus the fare that is received by the operating agency. So, this difference in price is called the subsidy, right. So, the producer, the benefit to the producer or the operator is still high, they are getting their money, and at the same time the consumer is not paying more. So, that difference is now being paid by the government. That is kind of called the subsidy. The subsidies may be operational or capital. So, capital subsidy meaning for buying the buses upfront, a one time cost subsidy can be given, whereas operational subsidy meaning during the operation period, if a fare is 10 rupees, then government says we will pay 5 rupees for it, and 5 rupees is charged to the user. So, those are all operational subsidies. For buying new fleet, capital subsidies. However, most effective bus systems do not run on subsidy, because now the subsidy, if it is government paying the subsidy, many times it adds extra burden on the government, and burden on the government meaning burden on the people for paying taxes. So, many people are opposed usually to any kind of subsidy paid by the government, and that is the reason that now some of the public transportation systems are going towards the PPP mode, or trying to encourage or trying to have just private transportation, private public transportation modes, and allow the market to allow the market forces to take over and determine the fare, and rather than the government coming in and providing subsidies. However, you have to remember that this is mass transportation, public transportation. So, your weakest part of your society or your vulnerable people in your society have to be able to afford these mass transportation systems, otherwise they are not serving their purpose. Now, so in order to conclude, these are the different types of financial measures that can be taken up in order to raise finances. It can come, it is usually coming from public finances. You can look at now private sectors. Many of the metros now are being developed in a PPP mode. In other ways, you can say that the capital costs are being put in by the private sector, and the operational costs are being taken care of by the public sector. So, in that way, the fares are being determined in such a manner that it does not put extra burden on the users, but at the same time the operational needs are met, right. So, other innovative financing sources have to be figured out, and multilateral agencies. So, now you would see that many of the agencies in some of the larger cities in India are collaborating on the fares, right. So, your bus systems are now collaborated with their metro systems, and if you have just one smart card, you can pay across two different types of modes. So, this also involves in developing a fare system that is sustainable for the operators, and also when it comes to enabling the operators to maintain and use their maintain and operate their facilities, and also the users don't feel burdened by the fare structure. So, multilateral agencies are involved in financing different types of public transportation systems that determine the optimal fare. So, in conclusion, in this lecture series, we have looked at how fare revenues are structured, what are the factors that are involved in determining the fare structure in your city, what is fare elasticity, how are fare levels directly measurable to your ridership. So, you cannot change the fares a whole lot, and then the entire concept of subsidy, how subsidy can kick in when there is a large gap between what the users are willing to pay and what the operators need to run the service. So, we have introduced you to the concept of subsidy as well. Here are some references for your further reading. Thank you very much for your attention.